The Syntax of Things by Arisa. Chapter 4. Wisdom. Accommodating. Harry rubbed his eyes lazily. The morning light penetrated the thin fabric of the curtains and filled the room, dim but enough to wake him up. He stretched and yawned, rolling onto his belly and scratching his nape. The clock on the nightstand read 8 o'clock. It was rather early, but familiar as he was with his Hogwarts schedule, he didn't feel like sleeping again. After having survived his first day under the same roof with Snape, he'd come to the conclusion that things weren't as bad as he'd imagined. After settling in, Snape had left him alone, and had proceeded to lock himself in his bedroom until dinner time.
"We will begin your lessons tomorrow,"
Snape informed him now as they ate.
"I suggest that you clear your mind before bedtime and make a habit of it for the rest of the summer."
Harry had tried to, but random thoughts kept popping into his mind, just as they had at Hogwarts. One thing he kept imagining was Dudley's disappointment when he'd realized that Harry wasn't going back to Surrey this year. Without Harry there, Dudley would have no one to torture. He knew Uncle Vernon would at least be happy. He'd have no reason to shout and yell anymore, and he wouldn't have to endure the sight of owls and wands where Dudley's second room should be. Without Harry, the Dursleys would happily state that they were perfectly normal again, and Aunt Petunia wouldn't need to cook for an extra person anymore, either. Thinking of food, Harry's stomach growled. After going through his morning routine, he noiselessly went down to the kitchen, realizing that Snape hadn't woken up yet. The fridge was still empty, so Harry poured himself some water and went upstairs again. Delving into his trunk, he found some stale biscuits Hermione had given him a week ago, and began chewing on one as he wandered around the house. He pushed the third door of the living room, and found it still locked.
"Alohomora."
He tried.
"Nothing." "Descendium."
Nothing. He peeked into the keyhole, but it was too dark on the other side to make out anything. Moving to the books, Harry pulled out the large tome and read Hunting Werewolves. He opened a random page. Although human-like when hidden from the moonlight and between the lunar cycles, the species of werewolves is considered quite dissimilar to humans. Emotions cannot be experienced in their full dimension by feral beasts and other deadly creatures. It remains feasible, though, for those emotions to be exceptionally well feigned. Harry closed the book annoyed. The next books he opened were mostly about potions, although he found one or two about history and psychology, too. The ones with titles referring to dark magic were blank inside, or couldn't be opened at all. Tiptoeing his way to Snape's room, Harry slowly turned the doorknob and peered in. Snape was sleeping on his stomach, his face hidden under a big pillow. He was half covered with a duvet, his grey nightshirt pulled up to reveal one hairy leg. Nudging the door a bit further open, Harry took sight of a wooden desk and wondered if the key to the locked door downstairs was hidden there. He lifted his wand.
"Accio keys,"
he whispered. Several different clinks and clanks were heard at once. Drawers opened, while pens and other objects fell to the floor and rolled away. Multiple keys slid from the desk and the nightstands, and flew to him from different directions. Harry recognized the rustiest one as the one Snape had used to unlock the door yesterday, and along with it he now had in his hands a handful of luggage keys, a big golden key that looked rather fake, a link with the Hogwarts crest on it, 2 rusty keychains, and a smaller link with keys that looked like they were meant for drawers or cabinets.
"Wicked,"
Harry whispered.
"Wicked,"
repeated Snape. He was now sitting on the bed, and the only thing betraying that he had just woken up was his really messy hair.
Good morning,"
Harry tried.
"It's a bad morning, Potter."
Kicking the duvet aside, Snape strode towards Harry and yanked the keys from his hand.
"I do not take defiance from anyone, and I will certainly not take it from you. However clever you might think you aren't, and I assure you that pushing my buttons is not a game you can win. For the last time, behave."
Harry could almost sense a plea in Snape's voice. His stomach growled again.
"The fridge is unplugged and the cabinets are empty. I found a tuna can under the sink, but it's older than I am, I think," he said. "Are you on a diet or what? I have biscuits, but I'm running out. Want one?"
He offered him the small box, and Snape looked at him as though he was inspecting a very disgusting cockroach. Harry shrugged his shoulders, and Snape threw the keys on his bed and walked to the wardrobe.
"Close the damn door and go get dressed. The market is 20 minutes away, and I'd like to avoid the peak hours. Can you manage and notice me not on that hideous scar of yours?" "Yeah, I think so."
Harry hated hearing comments about his scar. He pulled at his fringe reflexively, closed the door, and went to change his clothes. The mini-market was farther than Snape said, and it resembled a lot the suburban market back in Little Winging. Harry and Snape both grabbed the same basket and silently fought over it for a good few seconds. Snape won with a sneer, and Harry took another. When they separated, though, Harry didn't know what to put in his basket. He didn't have any cash with him, and wasn't sure if Snape would be willing to lend him any either. Feeling reckless, he walked to the sweets corridor and picked up a Frosties box and a new box of biscuits. Dawdling around the gum packs and the large fridges, he caught sight of the newspaper stand and approached it, noticing the many Muggle cooking books, the fashion brochures, the newspapers, and right behind them, the porn magazines. Harry stared for a moment and then went back to the sweets. He met Snape at the cash desk, only to realize that the man had made a rather wiser choice of goods than Harry had. His basket had meat, pasta, milk, eggs, and vegetables. Hesitantly, Harry placed his own basket on the desk, but surprisingly, Snape didn't argue. When they returned to Snape's home, Harry helped him store the food.
"Your living room is soaked in dust,"
said Harry as he balanced himself on his toes to reach the cabinet over the sink.
"With all those books and stuff that you've got in there, you'll gather termites. Happened to my cousin's room once."
Snape didn't answer.
"Don't you care that your house is filthy?"
pressed Harry, his voice bitter on purpose. The place resembled an asylum, a small and dark one, precisely.
"Are your parents alive?"
Why had he asked that?
"No." "Oh."
Harry's mind drifted to the memory of the crying child he had once seen in Snape's mind, while Snape's parents were shouting at each other.
"Mine either,"
he said, but Snape didn't laugh. They made soup. It was awful, but they ate it in silence. Snape retired to his room shortly after warning Harry that he'd better do the same. Harry washed the dishes and cleaned the table, trying to clear his mind as he did so. His scar hadn't bothered him since the battle at the Ministry, but he knew that the throbbing pain would return once Voldemort started to get angry again. Considering his upcoming Occlumency lessons, this was the worst time to think about the battle at the Ministry. Such thoughts always led back to Sirius. It didn't matter, Snape was going to see all his vulnerable memories anyway. Harry could do nothing about it. His skills in blocking Snape out of his mind were non-existent, and Snape was a master of legilimency. After washing his hands, Harry locked himself into his bedroom. He couldn't concentrate for the life of him, and so to prevent himself from thinking, he slept. A bang outside Harry's door made him jump up. "Potter!" Snape barked.
"Yes, just a minute."
Harry ran to the door, still a bit lightheaded from sleeping, and crashed right on Snape's sternum. He stepped back embarrassed and looked up with what he hoped to be a neutral face. Before he had the chance to say something, Snape had already gone downstairs. Right, now Harry was making a fool of himself too. Harry followed him, wand in hand. Once they reached the living room, Snape turned to face him. "Although it is clear that you've entirely ignored my instructions to close your mind, it is the headmaster's wish that we continue this farce." Harry nodded. "When sleeping, your mind relaxes and becomes susceptible to external penetration. It will serve you well to remember that in the future." "Yes."
"Okay."
Snape glared. "Now do you even remember what occlumency is?"
"It's going to help me block Voldemort out of my mind,"
Harry said impatiently. "Occlumency is an ancient art. It has existed since medieval times. It can prevent a trained legilimens from accessing one's thoughts and feelings. A person who practices this art is known as an occlument, or to put it simply, someone highly skilled at self-control." The fact that Harry's skill was nowhere to be seen was left untold.
"Well, I've no talent at it."
As Harry was expecting, these lessons were going to make Snape furious, although he never understood why it always had to happen so quickly. "You've no talent," Snape repeated. "Is this going to be your new excuse to spare yourself the remorse, then? Is your lack of, as you say, talent making you sleep easier at night?" Harry shook his head, but Snape didn't stop. "Had you committed yourself to take this seriously when I was training you, the Dark Lord wouldn't have planted visions into that foolish head of yours. I warned you this would happen, and yet you completely neglected to follow my orders." Snape took out his wand, his fingertips slowly sliding over it.
"That's not true. You were the one who kicked me out. I was trying."
"The results indicate so." Harry felt his heart skip a beat, and he squeezed his fist.
"The results weren't my fault."
He spat. His throat burned, and all of a sudden, so did his eyes. He couldn't remember feeling like this since Sirius's death. Is that so? Or are you just afraid to face the truth?
Harry shook his head frantically. It wasn't his fault. It was Snape's fault. It had always been Snape's fault.
Well, maybe you suck as a teacher, and that's why you blame me instead. If we had continued the lessons, Sirius would...
We are continuing them, Potter. Legilimens! Old memories came to the surface of Harry's mind, and he was unable to hold them back. Snape vanished from his vision, and he was now running away from Dudley, who was chasing him, shouting names. Sirius was falling behind the veil, slowly disappearing as Bellatrix's shattering laughter echoed around. Ron was begging Hermione to let him copy her essay, sitting by the fireplace in the common room. Harry gasped and leaned forward. He had dropped to his knees, steadying himself with his hands on the carpet. He looked up only to see Snape sneering at him. Non-existent progress. Why didn't you fight me? Snape asked coolly.
I wasn't expecting it.
Harry spat, getting up on the floor. I didn't think so. Snape was watching him closely. Close your eyes for me. Sighing, Harry did.
What do you feel?
Snape asked. His voice was coming closer, and Harry's instinct warned him to step back.
Don't know, Harry responded. Nothing specific.
Don't lie to me, Potter. Again, what do you feel? Snape was circling around Harry, his steps heavy. Harry bit his lip. He didn't like having his eyes closed.
Anger,
he said as he tried to determine Snape's location in the room. Anger, Harry swallowed.
Yes. Fear?
He wasn't going to admit that.
No, I just don't want you inside my head.
Let go of all emotions. Clear your thoughts from the weakness that dominates you. Snape stopped in front of him. Harry shifted nervously. He wasn't being dominated by weakness. Legilimens! A woman was screaming, and her cries echoed inside Harry's ears, overwhelming him with pain and fear and confusion, and Harry felt the Dementor taking his breath away, taking his voice, his vision, his life. Dumbledore twinkled an eye at him, and Harry smiled, running to catch up with Ron and Hermione. The snitch was right there. All he had to do was fly closer. Right there. Just a little bit too fast. You're not trying, Potter. Harry could barely hear him over the loud ringing in his ears.
I told you, I am trying. If you don't tell me how to do it, I'll never make it. What do you expect from me? Figure it out by accident while you just stand there and watch?
Snape gripped Harry's shoulder and pulled him up to his feet. You are weak. You cannot block me if you don't. Harry attempted to yank himself free, but Snape's grip only tightened.
Stop calling me that. Why don't you just explain to me how to do it?
Losing his patience, Harry dug his nails into Snape's wrist to force him to take off his hand. Snape did, and he scowled at the marks Harry left. Again. Concentrate! Snape raised his wand. 1, 2, Legilimens! Harry raised his own wand too and cast the only spell he knew would help him. Protego! Harry's mind teemed with a new set of memories he could not recognize as his own. Having done this before, he gathered himself and searched for the memories he wanted. Having less than a couple of seconds to make this work, he focused hard and thought of his mother. A teenage Snape was running through a corridor with a red-haired girl. Snape was in Hogsmeade, drinking a hot cup of chocolate with the same girl who was leaning over to take a sip from his cup. He was slammed against the wall with such force his breath was plucked from his lungs. Sliding to the floor, a painful gasp escaped his lips, and he looked up at Snape, who glared back with menace. They stared at each other for a long moment, Harry not daring to move. You are not to use this charm again, you understand? Snape seemed paler than usual, but his expression was blank. Harry considered it, a million questions behind his lips. He feared that if he voiced even the simplest of them, Snape would kill him. We will continue tomorrow. In the meantime... Snape pulled the book from a shelf and gave it to Harry. It may help you get rid of emotion.
But I don't want to get rid of emotion,
argued Harry, struggling back to his feet. You must. Snape avoided eye contact, and Harry ran upstairs.